Among Traitors, a report on the trial of Dr. Reiner Fuellmich in Göttingen on the 7th of February 2024. Witness of the day is Justus Hoffmann, who is also the complainant, by Daniela. The problem with the witness who was to be heard today was that he couldn't actually remember the exact events he wanted to report on. Additions such as, "if I remember correctly," followed almost every single sentence. Despite this, and perhaps precisely because of it, he spent 2 hours telling us one irrelevant and not very amusing story after another. He used very flowery descriptions for everything and always went into great detail, practically starting with Adam and Eve by describing the Garden of Eden to us in great detail. What did we learn that we didn't want to know? Brackets, the judges certainly didn't either, brackets closed, and which had absolutely nothing to do with the accusation he was supposed to explain to us. His language was very complicated, and he seemed to be trying to give the impression that he was a good storyteller, and that his story was of general interest. Maybe he just wanted to attract attention for as long as possible. We don't know. For example, it seemed important to him to know the names of the restaurants where he met the accused, where exactly they were located, what you could eat there, where the toilets were, and other meaningful things. It was even more important for the witness and complainant to discreetly put the accused in a bad light in passing, and in a rather chummy way. For example, we learned that the defendant had once confided to the witness in a friendly conversation that he and his wife had met in a psychiatric clinic. Interjection by the defendant: "I have never been in a psychiatric hospital in my entire life." In addition, the defendant allegedly discriminated against the witness because of his ethnic origin. The racism cudgel always works. Interjection from the defendant: "I don't know what your ethnic origin is." Which is understandable, because there's nothing unusual about the witness. According to the witness, the accused is also said to have often made anti-Semitic remarks. If the racism cudgel hasn't worked yet, then the anti-Semitism cudgel is unpacked. It helps in any case. When questioned, however, the witness didn't know anything more precise. In any case, he never wanted to commit himself to anything. He always left the back door open to escape in an emergency. I can well understand that. After all, he was on trial, and making false statements is a punishable offense. In any case, it became clear about a minute that the credibility of this witness could certainly be called into question. That will become clearer when the questioning, especially the questioning by the defendant, has begun. But I want to start from the beginning. Of course I went there again, because I was very interested to see whether the two complainants would actually appear. After all, they had been diagnosed with an illness at the hearing last week. Perhaps they had infected each other? There's no other explanation for the fact that the poor things had fallen ill at the same time, especially on such an important day. When I enter the room, it's already pretty full because I'm late. I get a seat near the tables designated for the complainants. I'm amazed. As empty as this side was last time, it's just as full today. Viviane Fischer, the fourth of the Corona Committee founders, has also joined us. And both of them, who were ill last week, have recovered, just in time for their interview. I'm told that Viviane Fischer has joined the two complainants. Now I have to go on a bit, but don't worry, it won't be as bad as today's testimony. So for me personally, September 2nd, 2022 is a very dark day that brought great changes, that destroyed hopes, and that was basically the beginning of the end. I see Viviana Fischer in front of me, only on my screen of course, nervously playing with her hands and making mysterious dark hints. You don't actually find out anything more specific, except that Reiner Fuellmich will no longer be attending the meetings until further notice. Then there's something about disinfectants being needed, but it's not clear to me what for. I wouldn't have put Reiner Fuellmich in the dirty corner. The way Viviana Fischer simply kicked her equal partner out of the collaborative project and told him shortly beforehand that the meeting in which she wanted to announce this wasn't even going to take place really went against the grain for me. There were only vague hints that Reiner Fuellmich had done something bad, but for a very long time you didn't find out what it was actually about. Even the Federal Executive Committee of the party, the Basis, of which the two were still the dual leadership at the time, was not informed about what had happened. It was of great importance, because a party in which the dual leadership is an enmity can no longer work together or even talk to each other, is unlikely to be elected by anyone. It's a very unpleasant story that I don't want to go into any further now. What remains is a very bad feeling, anger at those who caused the rift, and great disappointment. Important beacons of hope for the truth movement, namely the Corona Committee and the party Die Basis, were practically destroyed by design. This party, to which I belong, and which I think is the only one you can vote for with a clear conscience, has been losing members massively since then, and the Corona Committee, which Viviana Fischer has continued to run alone, is nowhere near the audience figures it used to have when Reiner Fuellmich was still involved. For these reasons, I don't necessarily burst into storms of enthusiasm when I see Viviana Fischer sitting there that morning, on the side of the complainants. The sight brings back memories for me, memories of the 125th meeting of the Corona Committee, when 5 people came together to judge a former colleague in his absence. There is now a great imbalance in this trial, which the defense lawyer is the first to notice. She says that the circumstances have now changed and that she feels overwhelmed as the only defense lawyer. First, the witness and complainant Justus Hoffmann is asked to sit on the chair in the middle, the so-called witness chair. It is not just a chair, there is also a small table in front of it. During his testimony, the witness will repeatedly lean on it demonstratively with his hands, as if he is about to jump up. Unfortunately, I can't see this very well, as I'm sitting directly behind him, but I can clearly see that the witness is not necessarily calm and is struggling with many insecurities and violent outbursts of emotions. I have already described how the first 2 hours go at the beginning of my report. I sink deeper and deeper into my chair and try desperately to keep my eyes open. In my mind, I've already decided never to come back to a court hearing, not unless I absolutely have to. Then the witness finally finishes his rambling remarks and is asked questions. The judge and the prosecutor want to know a few things, but their questions have slipped my mind. I was probably still in a daze. Fortunately, the lunch break is soon announced. An hour later, everyone is seated again. Now it really gets down to business, because now the defendant, who is an experienced trial lawyer and has certainly given many a witness hell, is allowed to ask his questions. In my first report, I wrote that it doesn't feel to me as if a trial is taking place in front of a court. This is even more the case today. When the defendant questions the witness, you can see the two of them sitting together at a table, discussing and often arguing with each other. It is a very heated exchange. The judge often issues admonitions, as he says he has a duty to ensure that the questioning is conducted properly and that the answers are not evaluated. But the two opponents can hardly be restrained, to be honest. I can understand that, because this is the first time that the defendant has been given the right to question the accuser about his accusation. The situation is highly emotionally charged. The defendant has had practically round-the-clock time to mull over everything for months, as he was locked in a prison cell and denied the opportunity to lead a normal life. He now works through the extensive indictment, annotated by Viviane Fischer, and questions the witness about his sometimes outrageous accusations. There is often resentment in the auditorium, but it is very restrained, as no comments are allowed. Suppressed laughter is also frequently heard. Although the defendant clearly shows how badly he respects the witness, he always pulls himself together, silently accepts the incoherent, stammered answer, and moves on to the next excellently formulated question. I think even the last person in the courtroom is beginning to realize that the complainant's main aim is to put the defendant in a bad light, a very bad light. There's talk of threats of violence against the witness, of Stasi methods that the accused is said to have used, and many more unpleasant things. Even the spectators sometimes feel attacked. As supporters of the accused, they are said to have blindly followed him and put him on a pedestal. Anyone who criticized this man could expect to be persecuted by his supporters. As members of the party Die Basis, they are said to have done nothing when the accused used evil methods to put himself at the head of the party. They had become radicalized under the leadership of the accused and were thus a great threat to the witness. The word fear is a frequently used one. The witness was afraid of having to raise the corporation tax of the Corona Foundation Committee alone. He was afraid that he and Antonia Fischer would be left alone in this committee. He was even afraid that the accused would take out a gun and shoot him down. Just like that. The biggest mystery in this story is probably this. This plaintiff does not feel he belongs to the truth movement. He uses the term Querdenker in a derogatory way. He does not feel that investigational work is necessary. He is only interested in the Corona Committee's money and has no intention of ever working there again. Why is he going to the enormous effort of going to court and suing for the return of donations received by this committee? All the spectators at the committee meetings hold their stomachs with laughter, because they know exactly how rarely Justus Hoffmann took part in the work and how sparing his contributions were, even when he was still physically present. The amusement in the auditorium subsides and it becomes quiet again when the defense attorney asks her questions. She also has a lot of them, and, as it is already late, the questioning has to be interrupted and the session for the day ended. It looks like it's going to be a long trial, because the questioning of witness Antonia Fischer, which was also planned for that day, hasn't even started yet. And Viviane Fischer certainly still has a lot to say. After the first 2 hours, which was so agonizing that I thought the witness would still not have arrived at the point by the end of the day, I had already decided never to come back. In the afternoon, however, the entertainment value skyrocketed from 0 to 100. There has certainly never been so much, brackets suppressed, brackets closed, laughter in a courtroom. The witness ended up sitting in front of the defendant like a heap of misery. At least that's how it looked from my perspective. I have to admit that I wasn't entirely sad about it. In my opinion, however, the questioning of the plaintiff was not absolutely necessary to reach a verdict. The defendant was already able to prove at the first two hearings that the accusations against him were completely unfounded. Whoever came up with this hair-raising story, I have my suspicions as to which side these people are on, did not do a particularly good job, fortunately for all of us. You couldn't make up a more absurd story. We all know that. This man gives his heart and soul to the investigation of crimes against humanity. He has proven that to us many times, even before the pandemic, when most of us first became active. He stood up for ordinary citizens, small real estate investors, to protect them from large fraudulent corporations. He is a clever and far-sighted lawyer with decades of experience. Therefore, he is unlikely to carelessly endanger his own work, his worldwide efforts, by taking money out of the donation box to pretty up his garden. A garden he will never use, because he will sell the house anyway. He would never do that for two reasons. Firstly, he has taken away his own basis for work, because yes, this committee is his baby, no matter what the three co-founders say. I can judge that as a viewer. He always seemed alert and attentive, communicated best with the guests, asked the most important questions, and took notes of everything he heard, which is more than you can say for his colleagues. Viviane Fischer always sat in front of a rather empty-looking sheet of paper and often uttered equally empty phrases, and the other two lawyers, well, I don't even want to talk about it. After what felt like the first 10 sessions, they were only conspicuous by their absence. They then suddenly reappeared for the big tribunal after Reiner Fuellmich was excluded. The second reason why the defendant would never embezzle money is that this makes him vulnerable and gives his opponents, of whom he has quite a few, the opportunity to put him in prison in the worst case. Just as has happened now, and as was the plan, because nobody can tell me that it's a coincidence that this case is now being heard in criminal court where it doesn't belong at all, even if the crime had actually been committed. Nor can anyone tell me that it is common practice to transport a man accused of failing to repay a contractually secured loan on time, with his arms twisted and shackled and handcuffed, from a maximum security prison to a court where he has to wait for hours in a barren cell for his trial. The close-ups of his handcuffed hands simply fit in too well with the defamatory reports that were shown on television. We all know there are conspiracies. There is collusion among the powerful. There always has been and there always will be, all over the world. And they're by no means the ridiculous fantasy of a few unworldly theorists, even if people are trying to hammer this idea into people's heads today. Why else would Ursula von der Leyen not want the text messages she exchanged with Pfizer to be published? Recognizing that there really is such a thing as conspiracies is a first step on the way to a better future. Let's continue to work on this realization. This trial, which I am now attending, will certainly shed further light, because here, with these revelations, the disinfecting sunlight that Viviane Fischer spoke of back then, when this whole story began, is really needed. Thanks, birdies, for singing, and thank you for watching.